Welcome to this afternoon's Commencement Seminar Series event with Mr. Garry Kasparov, Russian pro-democracy leader. Garry Kasparov is a Russian pro-democracy leader, a human rights activist, and former world chess champion. My name is Nancy Reese, and I hold the Christian A. Johnson Chair in Liberal Arts Studies. I serve as Division Director of University Studies, and I'm Professor of Anthropology and Peace and Conflict Studies at Colgate University. I'm also affiliated with the Russian and Eurasian Studies program, so it gives me a very special pleasure to welcome Mr. Kasparov. The seminar series is a new feature of our commencement weekend, and we're very grateful to Mr. Kasparov for his interest in participating in one of the inaugural sessions. It's my personal honor and privilege to introduce and welcome him back to Colgate. He was one of the first speakers for the Kirshner Family Series Global Leaders at Colgate. Mr. Kasparov is currently the chairman of the Human Rights Foundation, a security ambassador for Avast Software, and a senior visiting fellow at the Oxford Martin School. He was the youngest chess champion in history at age 22, and he was one of the first prominent Soviet citizens to call for democratic and market reforms in the Soviet Union. Mr. Kasparov speaks to business audiences around the world about innovation, strategy, decision-making, and artificial intelligence. He has chosen a special title for his remarks today, Leadership in a World of Fake Values. Please join me in a warm Colgate University welcome for Mr. Garry Kasparov.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Rees. Special thanks for using the very hard Russian pronunciation of my name. I will not hold anyone responsible for calling me Garry Kasparov, which is more natural in this country. By the way, I also thank you for a very short introduction. I'm always, these days, getting a little nervous about introductions, if they're long ones, so that I can learn something about myself never heard of. But perhaps Wikipedia is not yet accepted as the reference in Colgate here. So my also deep thanks to the Colgate University, President Casey, and my longtime friend, Dan Benton. I know he takes more pride in being a Colgate Raider than the first billion he made on Wall Street. Now, I have to say that being invited to speak at the commencement events, I made an assumption that I would be talking to graduates mostly. The first glance at the audience convinced me that I'm definitely not the oldest one here. Now, I have to apologize that some of the elements of my speech, they failed to address younger audience, but again, just make this correction in mind, and do not be upset. So, also I have to not apologize, but I hope that despite the current reputation of my country, you don't mind too much if this Russian will be meddling in your politics. Now back to commencement speech. So if you haven't realized it already, that's again addressing the younger part of the audience. The most important thing your formal education can do is to prepare to learn more as soon as you walk out that door. So this is the most important than ever today, when too many people prefer to hear only what they already believe and shy away from challenging information and opinions. It's an irony, I wouldn't call it a tragedy, that at the time when every person here can access some knowledge of humanity with a supercomputer in your pocket. Actually, when I say supercomputer, it's not an exaggeration. This device is 1,000 times more powerful than Cray's supercomputer 40 years ago. And it was one of the wonders of the world, Cray's supercomputer, 1,000 times more powerful. So having a supercomputer in your pocket where with a swipe of a finger, you can get any information you want, and people just don't want to do that. So they just buy the stories from other people without checking them. So after all, people are becoming less interested in seeking the truth. Yes, the truth. You remember the truth? This word, yes. It's not so popular these days, unfortunately. Not mere information, mere facts and figures. No. Do not reduce yourself to the simple acquisition of data as if you are no better than a computer. So trust me, I had my share of competing with computers, and it's a losing battle. Yeah, but the truth, that is always a prize worth pursuing, worth fighting for, worth dedicating your life to. I have a special appreciation for the truth because of my personal background. Not only my chess career, although that was also the search for truth of a sort. I was never content to just play a good move. I was always looking for the best one. Not every time I found the best one, even when I won the game, but that gave me an incentive to work harder next time. Going back to my studies, analyzing the game, looking for the best moves that I missed, even if I won the game. In my analysis, I wanted to find the truth of the position. And in the black and white world of the chessboard, this is quite possible to do. But when I talk about my background, I'm referring to, first of all, where I was born and raised. I didn't mention that. And you cannot tell from my accent that actually I was born and raised in the deep south right next to Georgia. So it was just the deep south of the USSR, in the city of Baku, capital of Azerbaijan, right next to the Republic of Georgia. So I was born in 1963, and when I became the world chess champion in 1985, so I did so as a representative of the Soviet Union. And by the way, this is again, referring to the younger part of the audience, most of you were not born when the country where I was born has disappeared. So the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR, officially disappeared from the map on December 25th, 1991. Yes, it was a very Merry Christmas. And I have to admit, I was a pretty good chess player, but I was really a lousy communist. So in this country, in the 80s, you had Reagan Democrats. I belonged to a group in the Soviet Union, you can even call Reagan communists. I couldn't help wondering, so if my talent won me prizes in chess tournaments in Europe or elsewhere, why shouldn't I be able to keep my earnings? So I was not also very obedient. I was always getting into trouble for criticizing the Soviet sport authorities around the chess world, and logically I ended up criticizing the entire Soviet system. It's even worse. I praised America, the rival and Cold War enemy of the Soviet Union since the end of the World War II. In the middle of the summer in 1989, I gave a long intro to a magazine that practically embodied Western decadence in the Soviet imagination. Yeah, you laugh, but you have no idea. So saying you even read Playboy in Moscow these days was like going to Colgate dinner party and saying you voted for Trump. Again, no offense meant. I made just educated guess. Yeah. But it wasn't just the publisher of my intro that raised eyebrows at the Soviet Union. Despite the increasing atmosphere of so-called glasnost, that's one of the Russian words that made into the English vocabulary, the Russian word for openness, between America and the USSR and the slow loosening of political repression under Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev, my outspoken criticism of Soviet society and my praise for America and American values in particular were something of a scandal. The fall of the Berlin Wall on November 9, 1989 was still 5 months away and largely unimagined. How many of you could imagine the fall of the Berlin Wall just in the beginning of 1989? Yeah. A month after that, Gorbachev and President George Bush, Bush 41, would declare that USSR and the United States were no longer enemies. That was December 1989. But even in this rapidly changing environment, my comments sounded close to treason to some in the Kremlin. The Playboy interviewer, the man who did the interview, was also surprised. "You sound like an American," he said. "Americans always want to be winners," I replied. "This is a very human quality. It proves that Americans are very close to true human nature," quote unquote. That's what I said in 1989. The Soviet authorities steeped in the myth of the moral superiority of communism and the Soviet people, and so the comments like this were quite serious. Sounded like a treason. But I continued to push my luck and to speak my mind. I have to also confess, being the world champion of the Soviet Union was type of a sacred cow. So this is they didn't like what I said. Many of them hated me, but yeah, I was kind of a pinnacle of the decades of communist propaganda that looked at the world chess champion as the best demonstration of the superiority of communist regime over the decadent West. So again, I abused this a bit, yeah. Yeah. I also believe that because of my fame, I had a responsibility to show to my fellow Soviets that it was possible to speak the truth in our country, the truth about our country. This was, such a controversial, dangerous thing then, and it may sound strange to the younger part of this audience today, but that was dangerous, and that's exactly why I want to talk about it today. The truth is the greatest enemy of any dictatorship, which is why it's so tightly controlled in such regimes, so blocked and twisted and corrupted. I was the rare Soviet citizen who could travel abroad and see what life was like in the free world. For the first time I traveled to a free country, it was France, 1976. I was just 13. So I think I was the only one in my, not just neighborhood, but probably in the whole district of the city of Baku, who just traveled beyond the boundaries of Iron Curtain. So it's the, I did not admire Americans because they were like winners and could keep their money. Well, a little bit. But I envied them because they could say what they wanted, and most importantly, think what they wanted without government repression. Again, just the older part of the audience may remember this classical Soviet joke. It's, "Comrade, did you know that America," it's Russian-American talking to each other, "American, the citizen can stand right in the White House and shout, 'Ronald Reagan can go to hell'? So what?" The Russian replies. In Moscow, I can also stand in front of Kremlin and to shout, 'Ronald Reagan can go to hell.'" But it wasn't just the freedom to criticize the government without going to jail. It was about everything. The freedom, the right to discuss ideas, business, culture, anything at all. You also had democracy, the ability to choose your own leaders in unpredictable elections, even if you didn't always like your leaders much more than we like ours. Happens. Most remarkably of all, Americans really believed in the system that has survived for more than 200 years. You believed in good and evil, that liberty was better than slavery, that the free speech mattered, the human rights wasn't just a public relations trick. The Soviet system told us none of these things really mattered, as long as you were obedient and let the state make all the decisions. And when all power is given to the state, it's no surprise that all the rights belong to the state as well. It's another Soviet joke. It's an average citizen approaching a lawyer, asking, "Do I have rights? Yes. Can I? No." That's the. In a dictatorship, the government tells you what you can and cannot do. In America, the Constitution tells the government what it cannot do to you. This is a vital difference. The American Democratic Republic has thrived for so long for a reason that may sound strange. Distrust. Not trust, but distrust. And my American friends might not like to hear this coming from a Russian, but your founding fathers did not trust you at all. But don't feel bad, because that most remarkable constellation of 18th century intellect and courage didn't trust anyone, not even each other. The first modern democratic republic was founded on this healthy distrust of human nature, which led your founders to construct a beautiful web of checks and balances, to create the first nation of laws, not nation of men. The founders were so skeptical because what they were attempting had no precedent. They prepared for the worst because they saw it all over the world. The world then, by the end of the 19th century, ruled only by monarchs, oligarchs, and warlords. The authors of the American Constitution fretted about a democracy that might slide into mob rule, or a president who might fashion himself emperor. They worried that too much political influence could accrue to small groups with extreme positions, and then the largely uneducated populace could be easily swayed by a demagogue who preyed on voters' basest instinct of self-interest. They were concerned that elected officials might exploit their powers of office to seek private gain instead of the public good. I'm sorry if it sounds a little too familiar today. The founders also did not trust the government to control free speech, although if they had also foreseen Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, and YouTube comment sections, they might have reconsidered a few things. The safeguards the founders built into the US Constitution have held up remarkably well, not by being rigid, but by being able to adapt and improve. It was amended to abolish the original American sin of slavery, and later to protect the democratic rights of minorities. It took 76 years and a civil war to abolish slavery. It took 131 years in the heroic suffrage movement to give women the right to vote. But after Prohibition banned the sale of alcohol in 1919, it took only 14 years to fix the mistake. That's an important one for graduates and their parents today. So far from perfect then, but a nation of laws it is. But the system has also allowed for the greatness of individuals to manifest, for the right man at the right time to lead the nation, even the world, through times of great change or trouble. This elasticity also means it's possible for the wrong man at the wrong time to do significant damage if the checks decline to check and the balance becomes unbalanced. I'm very lucky and grateful to live in the United States after living in two distinct authoritarian states, Soviet communism and then Putin's dictatorship. So I left Russia for good more than 5 years ago. So it's since February 2013, so I reside in New York. But I'm very worried to find many of the freedoms I so admired from afar now under attack right here, today. Surveys say that young Americans today believe in the importance of living in democracy less than any previous generation. I don't want to bother you with the statistics because it's so gloomy. So when you see the steady decline in the beliefs in democratic institutions. I attribute that mostly to being the first generation born after the end of the Cold War. The first American generation not to be opposed very clearly, but what the opposite of democracy looks like. But totalitarian ideas, authoritarian concepts did not die with the Soviet Union. As a matter of fact, evil doesn't die. It could be buried for a while under the rubble of Berlin Wall, but eventually it sprouts out when we lose our vigilance. I'm sure you are all aware that many people in the world still live without the freedom you enjoy here in the United States. You might not know that 4 billion people, over half the world's population, live in the unfree world. Yep, statistically. And worst of all, that the percentage is growing, steadily growing, not shrinking. In fact, 2017 was the 12th consecutive year that Freedom House has marked a decline in economic, political, and press freedom around the world. 12th consecutive year. Like most people, I believe that the global spread of democracy was inevitable after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. It freed me and my family and millions of people. The Iron Curtain was down, the Cold War was over, the best-selling book in 1992 was The End of History. Francis Fukuyama. Great book. I also believe that that was it. So the rest will be almost automatic. So we'll keep enjoying life without the memories of the dark past. So communism was defeated. Yeah, but today, as I said, I live in New York City. And I was not driven into exile by Soviets or by communists, but by a new dictatorship that rose only 8 years after the fall of the USSR. It's in August 1991. This is the joyful day celebrating it's not yet the collapse of the Soviet Union, but the collapse of the idea, removing the statue of the KGB founder Felix Dzerzhinsky from Lubyanka Square. You could bet a bottom dollar against KGB Lieutenant Colonel coming back in power in 9 years, less than 9 years. That's what happened. I still stayed in Russia and tried to do my utmost to save my country from sliding back into this totalitarian abyss. And my gold medals and awards as a representative of the USSR and Russia, I even say that if you count chess as a sport, I'm probably the most decorated Soviet and Russian athlete in history. So they offered me some safety there, but today my name is being purged from the Russian record books. Most of the books that presented the best Soviet Russian athletes, they somehow omitted my name. Thugs and despots are flourishing today. They still reject liberal democracy and the free market, not because of a competing ideology like communism, but because they understand that those things are a threat to their power and their money. The other difference with the old days is that few in the free world seem to care very much, despite knowing far more about what's happening in the world than decades ago. The internet was going to connect every living soul and shine a light into the dark corners of the world. How could dictatorship and genocide exist when every repression and every crime is instantly known to all? Instead, the light has reflected back to eliminate the hypocrisy and apathy of the most powerful nations in the world. Globalization has made it easy for the enemies of the free world to spread their influence in ways the Soviet Union couldn't have imagined, while the West has lost the will to defend itself and its values. We get our phones and shoes and everything else from the Chinese dictatorship, our oil from the Saudi dictatorship, and say we're not interested in politics, or that is all far away and it's none of our business anyway. But as we are finding out, these moral compromises have a way of following you home. The authoritarianism and corruption you ignore abroad doesn't stay there. It spreads like a cancer and you are not immune. If you shrug your shoulders at repression and nationalism and attacks on the free press in other countries, don't be surprised to see these trends at home. And as many have pointed out in the past few years, the tone of our public discourse is also changing for the worse. People used to disagree on the issues, but agree on general goals, basic rights and values, as well as accepting the humanity of their opponents. So many in this audience, I couldn't probably remember the first televised debates in this country between Vice President Nixon and Senator Kennedy. They disagreed on many things, but it was a lot of self-respect. So this senator, vice president, again, they talked about means, not about goals. Debates today are quite different. Today, anyone who disagrees might be called an enemy of the state. Language that is only fit for dictatorships. We are lowering the common denominator while abandoning the common ground. The virus of illiberalism is spreading, and not just within its old Cold War borders in places like Poland and Hungary. Nationalists and demagogues are also striving with considerable domestic support in free world bastions like Germany, the United Kingdom, and here in the United States. We can look at the election results across the free world. And when you look at the rise of the far right and also far left, it's the balance of the vote looks threatening. The first time since the World War II, there's the neo-Nazi party in German Bundestag. 94 neo-Nazis. It's the third largest party in Bundestag. The far left and far right in French elections made nearly 41% of the vote in the first ballot, when you look at Le Pen and Mélenchon combined. So that means that 41% of French voters, they are willing to to give up their freedom for populist slogans. Few people remember that Hitler has never won elections in Germany. The highest result of Nazi Party in 1932 elections was, I think, 37.2%. The problem is the communists made almost 16 at those elections, which means half of the German population, 53%, voted against democracy. So that's the trend, the most dangerous trend we are witnessing around the world. So the rise of the fringes, of the extremes. So just going around the world, we can also look at the NATO member Turkey has officially moved into unfree column. The Philippines is on the way, or already there, I don't know. And you have the US president praises autocratic leaders as strong and popular. For half the population of the US, the Soviet Union, I was born, might as well be ancient Troy, the stuff of legends. The existential communist threat that focused the free world's mind so effectively is long gone, and good riddance. But in its place are dozens of smaller threats, none big enough to earn the attention necessary to do much about it, but cumulatively destabilizing. Islamist terror, Russian hybrid wars, corruption, kleptocracy, failed states, and waves of refugees. The free world political fractures make it nearly impossible to meet these external challenges, not to mention the internal ones of skyrocketing debt and rising economic inequality. Oh, by the way, I have to apologize for mentioning the word debt in this room today. The political center is still there, being shouted down by the fringers. Radical rhetoric that would once have drawn condemnation from all sides is finding an audience among people who are increasingly convinced that the only answer to extremism is equal and opposite extremism. But wise elders touting sanity and centrism aren't going to motivate many of the 30 million Americans who voted for Bernie Sanders, let alone Trump's 63 million voters, or even more critical, 90 million people who didn't vote at all. Democracies get the leaders they deserve, and we must examine the shift in values and priorities and see how we can turn back the tide. Cultural shifts do not come from middle age, however. I'm 55, but I'm just trying to push the torch of light and freedom to younger generations. By the time, when I say you, again, I address the younger part of the audience, have a family and mortgage, it becomes very difficult to generate disruptive force against the status quo. So your work is just the beginning. And as much as we may intellectualize the topic and participate in the debate, real and lasting change will have to come from young generation and from those who are still in school, whether it be college or even kindergarten. If young people are not allowed, encouraged to take risks, to fail and try again, we are waiting for a shift that will never come. Above all, innovation requires freedom. Freedom from debt, from regulation, from fear, from preconceived notion about what is and is not possible. Perhaps the most critical challenge of all will be rediscovering the power of a free individual human being, one who is not tied with obligations to anything beyond his or her dreams. The decline in face of liberal democracy and free markets, the things that truly made America great, by the way, is connected to the lack of opportunity. If liberalism no longer guarantees prosperity, or at least a chance to prosperity, why it is so special? Thinking this way gets things backward. Rising inequality is a critical problem today, but it comes from decades of moving away from the principles of excellence that created the richest society in history. Risk, excellence, liberty, opportunity, unity. Those American founding values are also the values of innovation and entrepreneurialism, values of new technologies, new industries, and new jobs. There has been a shift away from those values and toward their opposites. A shift toward security equivalence, comfort, cynicism, and hyperpartisanship. In the span of one generation, the world's greatest entrepreneurs and capitalists convinced themselves that they could be rewarded without risk. Welcome into the money printing world. It's time to wake up from this dangerous delusion. It's time to dream again about exploration, to dream about excellence and everything else that made and still makes America great. There is no one else. The unfree world can copy, but true innovation requires freedom, especially the freedom to fail. Without that, there can be none of the dynamic competition that produces success. I talked about history and the founders, but not for solutions, only for inspiration. I believe that we should look into the past, not for solutions, but for inspiration. We need to look forward, onward, and upward. We need grand challenges to inspire you, young generation, and your limitless energy, your ambition, and creativity. We must make building things up more attractive than burning them down. The founders believed that each generation will find ways to keep democracy alive. And it's time for you to prove them right. And after you're done watching The Avengers, it's time to really save the world. Thank you. We have time for questions, and there are 2 mics in the room, I was told. So let's start raising hands. Why not in Russia?
Hi, and thank you. Those were terrific words, and I think especially for our college grads. I just have a general question. You played chess, you personified chess very passionately. Now in the second part of your life, you're very passionately defending democracy and all those ideals. How do you compare those 2 passions?
Just going back to the moment where I quit. Is it working? Yeah. Okay. So going back to the moment in 2005 when I quit professional chess and moved into something that people mistakenly call Russian politics. So I had to deal with this question, and people kept asking, so how my chess experience could help me in this muddy waters of politics. My response was not at all, because in chess we had fixed rules and unpredictable results, and in Putin's Russia is exactly the opposite. Now, but on a serious note, while, as I said, there are rules in chess, and there are some rules not as well respected in politics, it was part of my nature to take new challenge. It goes all the way back to my early days, my childhood, where I learned from my mother that it was not about just winning. Of course, it was about winning, but it was something more important. You have to make the difference. And that's why I could stay on top of the world of chess for 20 years, because I always knew that I could learn even from the games I won. I briefly mentioned it in my presentation. Each game contains very valuable information. And it's very difficult for us, if we are successful, if we are victorious, actually to look back and to learn something from this game. Not recognizing the simple fact that if we won, then many others lost. And if we don't do our homework, they will go back after us next day with new ideas. So to be on the cutting edge, to be ahead of the curve, you always have to be relentless in analyzing your own games and looking with a microscope for your mistakes. Again, what kept me on top for afloat for so long is my belief that each game is an opportunity to make the difference. And I just recognize that, as long as you're challenging your own excellence, you will never be short of opponents. So I reached a point in my life when I thought, that's it. I did more than I could have imagined in the game of chess. It's time now to make the difference elsewhere. Not that I was paranoid about my own importance, and I realized that anywhere outside of chess, my authority will be crippled compared to what I could rally in the game of chess. But still, it's not about winning the game. Since 2005, I played a game which was a moral imperative. And I thought that I could make the difference. I could rally people behind the cause in Russia. I could explain the dangers of Putin's regime to the rest of the world, though I have to say for many years it was like shouting in the desert, pointing out at Putin and the dangers. And I've been saying for years that Putin was our problem, but eventually it will be everybody's problem. Not because I had a crystal ball and a special Nostradamus ability, just because I read few history books. And I knew that every dictator, after eliminating all the enemies in his own country, destroying the political opposition, he will have no choice but to go elsewhere, because dictator can justify his endless stay in power by having enemies. My first article about Vladimir Putin was in January 2001. Again, I saw immediately the dangers because I just heard what he said. It's not about making assumptions. By the way, often you have to hear what dictators are saying. We made these mistakes many times, going back in the 30s, for instance. It's just not listening to what dictators or would-be dictators have been promising, discouraging it as a domestic, just the stuff for domestic consumption. It's when was the first time the American press mentioned Adolf Hitler? In 1922, New York Times. Short, very short article talking about the radical group in Germany, an anti-Semitic group, saying, but it's all about, it's for domestic consumption. That's you can disregard it because it's all just, just to gain popularity there. Don't take it seriously. We didn't. Yeah. So Vladimir Putin made statements that were abundantly clear from my perspective. Once KGB, always KGB, quote unquote. Meeting these so-called former colleagues at Lubyanka when he was still a prime minister, Yeltsin's prime minister. The collapse of the Soviet Union, the greatest geopolitical disaster of the 20th century, quote unquote. And his first action as Russian president, restoration of Soviet anthem. Bring these three together, and you could have a very clear idea what this person with this mindset could do if given the chance. Unfortunately, he was given the chance. So I feel that it's a very odd competition by chess standards today, because I don't know what is the end of the game. But I'm there not to win, but just to inspire others. And also, I recognize that it was not just about Putin, so it was about global fight for human rights. So that's why, when I was offered great honor to take place of one of my great heroes, Václav Havel, who was the first chairman of Human Rights Foundation, when he passed away, they suggested me to replace him, and so I did it without any hesitations. And I'm concerned now that it's just you may call it success of Putin's model, and moreover even success of so-called Chinese model, has been looked too attractive to young minds, even in this country. And it's very important just to educate them because they forgot what was communism, what was Gulag, and many things they simply disregard, as I said, as ancient history. It's not ancient history. It's with us, and unless we learn from history, history is doomed to be repeated. Okay, it's a good start. It comes from the center, not from the front.
Hi, thank you for your speech. In your speech, you seem to put, you talked about like the French elections and the past American elections, and you seem to put individuals like Mélenchon on the same level as Le Pen's National Front and put Sanders on the same level as Donald Trump. And I was wondering if you thought that was a fair comparison to make,
yes.
or if you think that those are two different groups.
This is let's make it. No, as for Mélenchon and Le Pen, yes, absolutely, both even individuals. Mélenchon is a crazy, unreformed communist who is just openly challenging the very foundation of democracy. I would put Jeremy Corbyn in the same group, unreformed communist, terrorist sympathizer. It's quite tragic that after disastrous Brexit vote, you could see the rise of the far left on the Labour side. And you have potentially this kind of man 5 minutes away from Downing Street 10, though I don't think he'll win. Now, Sanders-Trump is not as simple because Sanders is a genuine person, so you cannot compare individuals. But the ideas he's promoting, hey, I grew up in the Soviet Union. It's just, and I think it's, whether you understand or not, but that could be extremely damaging. It could have a lasting damage for the country. About several months ago, I was on Preet Bharara's podcast, and we talked about Trump's effect. And I said, somehow I think this Trump election was probably a good sign for America because it will wake up call. Because Trump is, for me, it's more like it's a demonstration of the sickness of the body. So the fact is that he could be nominated by one of the parties and elected. Tells you that something was wrong. But I said the good news is that Donald Trump was not Frank Underwood. Yeah. So if you are interested, it's at the time of the primaries. At the time of the primaries, I think it was March 2016. I think it was around Super Tuesday. I put on my social just a very small blog. I had the picture of Sanders just wearing the hat, so the top hat, and it said, "Let's make America Greece again." It's just a joke. It just said. Now, then there was such a massive response. So, and I entered the debate, which I think is just, if you look at it's still there. It was one of the most probably heavily populated pages. I had 10.5 million visits. So just it's on the page, and it was about the socialism because I ended up writing the very small blog, so around 133 words, and I explained my views about socialism. So, and I said, I don't want to steal the thunder, so you go there and read it. But basically, it's I think that's selling illusions is very dangerous. And my concern is that right now we have this pendulum swinging from one side to another, and the danger is that with craziness of this administration, it could swing all the way far to the left, creating just another problem. Because you have to stop it at one point. You have to stop it somewhere in the middle. Now, there will be fluctuations, but the middle class, the centrist politics, that's what was so fundamental for the success of this country.
Good afternoon, Mr. Kasparov. My question is, what's the best possible outcome for the future of U.S.-Russian relations, and what must occur for that to happen? Thank you.
Ooh. Yes. Yeah. Look, I'm thinking about long answer and short answer. Let me give you a short answer, and then if you are not satisfied, I'll go to just a longer one. You said, if I correctly, U.S.-Russian relations. Correct. Perfect. I'm sure that relations between United States of America and Russian Federation will be always great, as long as the interests of these two countries are being accounted. The problem is not relations between Russia and America. The problem is that today it's about relations between Putin and Trump. And I think we just have to walk away from this individual bromance. because both had interest, I believe, not connected to the strategic interests of the countries they unfortunately represent today. Good enough, or you want more?
Hello, thank you for coming to speak with us today. My question is that after hearing your speech, I felt inspired by your call to action and felt like I have a responsibility. But I was wondering if you have a way to reconcile that with all of the atrocities that are committed in the name of democracy around the world, and how to kind of make a distinction between doing good and then...
Can you name, just to be specific, name atrocities in the name of democracy?
I think that we don't have to go too far back in history to look at ways that the U.S. may have interfered in governments around the world in the name
No,
of...
excuse me, be more specific, because you said in the name of democracy. Yeah.
Yeah, so...
I insist on being more specific.
Okay, I mean, to go back to Iraq, or even in Latin America, many countries, Venezuela, or
Excuse me?
Central America.
What do you say? Venezuela?
Yeah, so...
Venezuela?
Yes.
When?
So there's... That's back before I
wish the United States will interfere to save the Venezuelans from the disaster. It's the richest country in Latin America that has been ruined by communists. By criminals that are about selling drugs via Cuba and Mexico to this country. Now, you said Iraq? I born in the
Israel
Soviet
and
Union.
Palestine, or...
No, wait a second. Don't mix the things. Israel and Palestine is this.
Saying,
Yes, Iraq is this. Saddam Hussein was one of the worst dictators. So are you seriously telling me that removing dictator who just had this one of the bloodiest record in history was a crime? You may disagree with, and as I, by the way, did, with the post-war policies. I applaud every action that removed dictators from their powers. I think that one of the worst decisions was inaction of Obama administration that left Syrians to die from chemical attacks in 2013. It's because that's what we're seeing today. So we live in a world that is infested by dangerous animals. So you have Putins, you have Chinese dictators, you have Iranian mullahs, you have terrorists of all stripes. So following your logic, probably we should put General Eisenhower and Marshal Montgomery in Hague for crimes committed against innocent German women and children that they died under the bombs. I think we have to make choices, but it's not in the name of democracy. So I believe that in the name of democracy, they saved Iraqis from a worse dictator. Now, what's happened then? After 40 years of dictatorship, nobody can be guaranteed to have freedom. There's no recipe from a cookbook that you remove Gaddafi after 42 years of dictatorship, and next day it will be a democratic paradise. Dictators stayed in power because they're so good in eradicating any normal political life. And after 40 years, they create a desert. And what kind of animals can survive in the desert? Scorpions, snakes, rats. It's a dangerous world. And I'm not trying to say that America doesn't have stains on its reputation. But again, don't forget, I grew up in the Soviet Union. Yeah, I was grateful to presidents like Harry Truman and Ronald Reagan, who helped to defeat one of the most unhuman ideologies in the world. So we may see it from different perspectives, but please don't tell me about American interference in countries like Venezuela. Hopefully, there will be an interference. So we should move to to right or left, you know.
How serious do you think the threat is to Putin from the Magnitsky Act and the spread of it throughout the world?
Look, thanks for raising this issue, because it's important, you know, just to talk about the mechanism of sanctions, and so how sanctions can actually lead to the political change in the unfree world. It's very difficult for us to measure the damage, but we can look at Putin's reaction. So the fact is that Putin's cronies in the parliament keep stamping the new laws to punish those who are promoting Magnitsky Law. For instance, just a few days ago, they introduced a new bill that will make everybody, including myself, a criminal for suggesting that Magnitsky Law Magnitsky Act can be passed by one or another country. So if you look at the Putin's regime as the more like a mafia structure, where the loyalty is the key criteria for staying within the system, and no other crimes can be punishable except the loss of loyalty to the boss. In this system, Magnitsky Act is a serious threat, because the boss, the big boss, the capo di tutti capi, must protect every hitman. And if he doesn't offer this full protection, the question is why these people should offer him 100% loyalty. So Putin immediately recognized the danger from Magnitsky Act. When we started it, you know, started Bill Browder and then late Boris Nemtsov, myself. It was all the way back in 2012. It was a very slow and painful process, because we still heard many voices on both sides of the Atlantic about searching for common ground with Putin. Let's find a way of separating Putin's crimes inside Russia and eventually outside of Russia, with potential areas of interest where we could cooperate. My response was that Putin's strategic agenda was totally the opposite to the strategic agenda of the free world, because we here want stability, we want to spread prosperity, Putin wants to spread chaos. And Magnitsky Act is the best way to loosen support for Putin among his cronies, his ranks and files. It doesn't mean that tomorrow they will all rise against him, because he still has plenty of cash, because Europe's still buying Russian gas, and there's the oil prices going up. And that's why, by the way, he's so happy just to see more and more conflict in the Middle East. Just, you know, there always benefits from any conflict, and one of them is the rise of oil prices. So I wouldn't say that all oil money is bad. You still have Norway, for instance, that lives on oil oil money. But most of the bad money in the world comes from oil and energy. So I think that sanctions, if they are universally accepted and Europe sticks to them, though it's more and more questionable, because so many Putin cronies now are just not only in the parliaments but in the governments in Europe. But so far Europe is sticking to sanctions. Hopefully it will show some results, because Russian economy is in terrible shape, and eventually, as we said in the Soviet Union, the freezer may eventually beat the TV set.
I think in order to finish
but we
at
should give like
2:30.
one question from the side, because I just feel so bad, you know, that is,
Okay.
we totally decimated the fringes.
Do we have one quick
Yes.
question from
Okay.
the side? Okay, one question. You get the last question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kasparov. I know that in your speech you said something that resonated with me, which was your disappointment with the sort of rising extremism in parties like the British Labour Party, or just for example, in the American Republican Party, where you see something that was at first sort of internally, politically, a bit right of center, a bit left of center, becoming something more extremist. And voters in countries that have very strong two-party systems often feel like they're no longer able to vote their conscience and must rather choose what they deem to be the lesser of two evils. So I would ask what your advice would be for people who find ourselves in that sort of situation.
Oh, thank you. It's a great question. Last year, I got together with my friends from both sides, so just in the wake of the elections. And so we created an organization called Renew Democracy Initiative, so RDI, so you can look at our website. So today actually was an article of one of our co-founders, Richard Horowitz, on Daily Beast. I wrote a big piece in the Daily News a few days, just last Sunday. Max Boot had a big piece in Washington Post, so that's the right side. Richard North Patterson had Boston Globe and Huffington Post, that's from the left side. We had originally about 120 signatories, ranging from, say, Jose Maria Aznar, former Prime Minister, on one side, to Stephen Fry on the other side. So from Brett Stevens on one side to Larry Tribe on the other side. So it's an attempt to actually agree on the values. So we disagree on many things, but for us to continue our debate about abortions and gun control, we need to preserve the framework, because the whole foundation of the Republic is in jeopardy. So it's just you dealing with the, for instance, the Republican Party, where we all know that Ronald Reagan will be expelled today. They call it now so-called Reno, Republican in the name only. So it's because you look at many positions. For instance, some people, I'm sure here, disagreed with what he did, but amnesty for immigrants, just many other things that totally unacceptable. Free trade, for instance. So it seems to me that it's just we looking at the latest primary results. We see that, for the Democratic Party also just appoints very radical candidates, just because they're anti-Trump. But it's I don't want just to be anti-Trump. So it's bad, but it's like fighting the fever when you have the virus. And in my view, so it's very important for America to start looking for more sophisticated political system. Two-party system, in my view, is just it's outdated, because it helps the fringes, it helps radicals, because it's all about the primaries and gerrymandering. And that's why, the real fight happens at the primaries, and you need your base. So that's why the Republicans care about the base from the Trump side, and Democrats will care only about from challenge that comes from Sanders, Warren, or even further left. So, and it drives both parties away from the center. The political center has been decimated. So one of the ideas that we try to bring back to the table is to revive the political middle. Or just to use a soundbite, make politics sane again.
So, on behalf of Colgate University, I want to thank Mr. Kasparov for coming and for giving a very stimulating talk today.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
We look forward to giving him an honorary degree tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.